Hello, Maria. How are you?
Hi, Giotto. I'm well. And you?
I'm good. I'm good. So today we talk about the first fetter. Can
Yeah,
you explain a little bit, not just what is the first fetter, but also what are the fetters in general in the classical Buddhist approach of enlightenment?
right. Well, the fetters in general are whatever holds you back or keeps you in a state of suffering and illusion. And the illusions create the suffering from a Buddhist perspective. And they are largely self referential. They're all about a self that we've constructed. Um, and they start quite crudely with the first fetter, which is really about imagining that there is a separate self who is in control, who is thinking the thoughts, who is doing the actions, um, making the decisions. Yeah, it's a classic illusion of like a little woman or man in the box who's holding all the strings and making everything happen.
Okay. So, I mean, can you elaborate more? So how do you break this illusion? How do you go through this illusion?
Well, the methodology is to look in your experience for this self that you assume is there. So it's not that you're kind of trying to impose any new belief. You're just trying to look at whatever belief is actually there, and see whether it's true. So I will get people to look into uh, experience of the five senses and the sixth sense, if you want to call the mind such a thing, thoughts as well. So you look into thoughts, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, those very basic sensory experiences, and see whether there is an entity that is receiving them or doing them. And then I usually look into three main areas. So there's the one I just mentioned, which is the sensory experience and whether there's an experiencer. But then I also get people to look into decision making, because control is a big part of that illusion, that there is someone in control of all the actions and, um, you know, pre-thinking and making the decisions. Um, And then what people often see is, oh, these decisions just get made automatically. I just got out of bed when I got out of bed. I just uh, chose that cup and not the other cup. There wasn't a kind of process. It just happened automatically. So, and then also looking into thinking. That's the third area that I usually get people to look into is, there's a big one, the author of thoughts. Are you the author of your thoughts? Are you, thinking the thoughts? Or are the thoughts simply arising?
So specifically, what is exactly the realization? Is it like there is no self, or we don't know if there is a self or not, or what? I mean, let's assume that someone goes through this process of feather one with you.
Yeah.
What are they supposed to realize, let's say, to graduate from feather one? What is the realization? They say, oh, okay, I realize this now, I'm good with feather one. What will you say is the criteria?
Well, usually they experience some kind of shift. It's an experiential shift where they stop assuming that they have the control that they think they have, or that there is this thinker behind the thoughts. Usually people experience it as a kind of feeling of freedom. Uh, there can be a little pop moment where you've looked and you've looked and you've looked, like on a rinse and repeat basis, for this thing that you assume is there, this self who's in control, this separate self. And they can, I know you probably don't like this, but they don't find it. And
For the sake of the audience, let's
yeah.
explain this specific thing and why I don't like it. And
Okay.
let's say the difference in the approaches. So
Yes.
I will just sum it up, and you can elaborate more. But basically,
Sure.
so your approach is, you say, to look for this entity, for this decision maker, for this self. I'm not sure how you call it, but I've used enough words, I think, to describe it. Let's call it an entity a decision maker, a thinker. So that's what you usually say. So you say you look for this thing, and you ask your students to look for this thing until basically at some point they give up. So we are going to cheat a little bit here and say eventually they are supposed to give up and to say, I cannot find it. A form of surrender, basically. Is that correct?
I wouldn't quite. Yeah, you've almost got it. I think in terms of process, the repeated looking, but I wouldn't call it a surrender or a giving up. It is a positive. Uh, it is a positive realization, if you like,
Oh,
of
no,
the
I
absence.
didn't mean surrender in a negative
Oh,
way.
oh,
So
okay.
let's say they stop searching. So basically, they try to search for this entity,
Yeah.
this thinker, this decision maker. And at some point, they say, well, I cannot find it. And so this is the I'm not sure if we have an agreement or not, or we converge in some way or not. But basically, you say, well, then it's not there. But I'm not sure if that's really what you mean. So let's say they try to search for this entity, this decision maker, and then they cannot find it. So the conclusion becomes kind of, so it's not there, or is it so maybe it's not there? Because that would be a huge difference. So that's what I wanted also to ask you first before when you were describing. So let's say the graduation, the realization that one has to graduate from this, is it that one has to have this certainty that is not there, or he must stop assuming that it's there? So it's like the final state will be, okay, I cannot find it, so I'm not sure anymore that it's there. Maybe it's there and I cannot find it, maybe because maybe the starting point is that they are certain that it's there, this entity decision maker. So they start, let's say when you're at let's call it fetter zero. So you have just started. So you're at fetter zero, and you have the belief that there definitely is an entity that can is a thinker, a decider, and etc., etc. Now when you graduate from fetter one with your approach, what is the state that you reach? Is it, for sure you lose the certainty that there is this entity, but do you replace it with a new certainty that there definitely is not such entity? Or do you just say, well, I cannot find it, so maybe it's not there, but maybe it's also there? So is it doubt, or is it a new certainty? What is the end situation, the end, not end
Mm.
goal, but the end state of other one?
Well, I think, I mean, to say that there is a, yeah, I get your question in that, what is the end state? But I don't think everyone has exactly the same end state. But I think that what is, because it's not state based, it's not about state of mind, but it's a realization.
No, but
Um,
yeah, I use the word state in a very broad sense, intending
okay,
what is the situation. I mean, where are you?
sure.
So point
Yeah,
zero, you
yeah,
have the certainty that there is such an entity. Point
right.
one, is it
Hmm.
a new certainty that is not there, or is it that you just remove the certainty that is there, but and so it's just doubt? Maybe it's there, maybe it's not there.
Well, it's a little complex because it's not about replacing it. As I said, it's not about replacing it with a new belief, a certain, like a cognitive certainty. Oh, well, I know there is no self, but it is an experiential dropping away. When you have that realization, you stop literally identifying with all the experience that is happening in the same way. So you have a kind of broader perspective that is not that does not feel like you have a separate self there. That does not feel like there is someone in control pulling all the strings. So it is an experiential difference in perspective and experience of the world. So it's like you would still use the conventional label, I, you, me. You would still use language which is inherently polarized and assuming a self and another, for example, but you wouldn't anymore assume that that relates to a real separate self.
I mean, I understand that it's not adding a new belief, but it's removing something. But effectively, like at the end of the day, do you
Mm.
believe there is no such entity, or you just don't know? What would you say?
I'd say on a cognitive, from a cognitive point of view, from a belief point of view, I think you probably would just be hanging very loose to that because actually, all the other illusions, as I said at the beginning, are self-referential. So there's more layers of the onion here. There's more illusions connected to. So there's more that we identify with in our experience than just the agency aspect of fetter one. Fetter one is just about whether there's an agent who's in control and calling the shots, as it were.
Yeah, yeah,
But then,
but so
you know,
as of now, your
yeah.
belief is that this agent does not exist, or it's that maybe it exists, maybe not, you don't know. So initially you were sure, and you evolve, like you in quotes evolve, let's say, towards maybe it exists, maybe not, or towards it does not exist, pop period. Which one will you say is more accurate?
I- I'd say it's the latter. It doesn't exist. It's not there.
So it's more a
Yeah.
certainty that this agent is not there.
Well, experientially, you don't experience it as being there. So yes, so you that's your perspective.
I see. So,
It's
but you know my objection.
yeah. I know your
My,
objection.
I mean, there are many possible, but my first objection will be, for example, let's say there are things we cannot see, but that do exist. Let's say with
Yeah,
X-ray, we have.
that's right.
I mean, before X-ray, we thought those things did not exist. Then we see them, and we were,
Yeah.
oh my god, they always existed. We just didn't know. So it's like there are many things that are invisible, like gravity is invisible, but we can feel its effects. But maybe there are things that we cannot. I mean, of course you could argue that if you can absolutely in no way and never feel the effect of something, it's as if it does not exist. You understand, like if something was completely separate, let's say there is a magic box and inside you put something, but that thing cannot communicate with the outside in any way. Even if you put a nuclear bomb inside, it will not even shake, um, effectively that thing will be separate from the outside. So so let's say separate, I will argue, um, if we want to, let's say this most strict meaning of separate will be that is something that is completely independent. So basically thing A is separate from thing B if they cannot influence each other in any way. Then we could argue they are completely. If there is the slightest form of influence, then effectively they are not separate. So separate, of course, one could assume that it's like, let's say my hands are joined and then they are separate, but they're not really separate. It's like in some way they can influence each other. I can do this or I can do that. So they can still influence each other. So the idea is, for me, separate in its most strict sense will mean absolute impossibility of reciprocal influence. So those two things cannot influence each other. Now, of course, this is not exactly the same as the idea of the entity, because with the entity we are debating if it exists or not, because it's two different things. It's like I think what we have been saying so far is not if this entity is separate or not, is more if it exists or not. So we both agree that when someone start the path, let's say they're at fetter zero, they believe this entity definitely exists and is definitely separate, which according to my definition makes no sense, because if it was separate, then it couldn't affect anything. But let's put that aside. And then they reach up after fetter one, they reach a new point, let's say a new situation, whatever. I mean, they reach a new something, and according a new perspective, exactly. And according to you, the new perspective is more similar to not believing anymore in the existence of this entity. And according to me, it would, let me say mine, and then you can elaborate on yours. And according to me, it would be that it's like if before you're sure this entity exists, then after you're not sure. It may
Mm-hmm.
exist, it may
Mm-hmm.
not exist, we don't know, but for
Mm-hmm.
sure it's not separate because it
Okay.
influences.
Right.
So what you were saying, sorry?
Well, I was just saying that in a way, the complication that I mentioned before is that, the feeling of an existence or of an existent um, subjective awareness or whatever goes all the way to the eighth fetter. So it does get subtler and subtler. So in a way, that would fit with what you're saying. It's because there is still quite a lot of self-referential illusion still in place when you've had that initial insight into no agency. Um, you still have the reactivity illusion, which a lot of people are really identified with because it's my very personal way of reacting based on, desire and ill will. Or subject object illusion is still in place. So that's still a subject in relation to an object, isn't it? Subject and others, me and others. Um,
Yes,
yeah, I mean,
basically,
I
you
don't.
need to go to do many more feathers before you completely, let's say, realize the idea, or at least dissolve, let's say, the idea of separation.
Yes, I think so, definitely. I mean, but I think that this makes the initial chink in the armor, if you like, of that belief that
Mm.
one is a separate subjective existence. Um, yeah, in control. Yeah,
So yeah, so
I
so
mean,
people, go ahead, yeah.
well, no, it's okay. I don't want to get too much into the further fetters because we'll probably discuss them
No, no, yeah, let's stick
more
to fetter one because if
one by one. Yeah.
etc. So yeah, so
Okay.
basically the idea is people start this process with a very strong idea that they are something and that they can specifically pinpoint, I think, this thing that they are, which is either an
Hmm.
agent, a controller, a thinker. They have this
Hmm.
very strong assumption. Now, me and you,
Yeah.
we diverge in the, let's say, the new perspective that comes after further one. You say that, yeah, well, say it in your own words.
Well, that you no longer believe that there is a little man in the box or woman in the box who is in control, the thinker of thoughts,
Yes.
experiencer of experience, a separate self.
Whereas I would more say you're not so sure anymore. So it will be at a level zero, you're sure. And when you overcome, then it's like, who knows? I mean, maybe there is this little thinker in the box, but maybe it's not an obvious box. Maybe it's a very special multi-dimensional box. I'm just saying nonsense just for the sake of argument. Maybe it's a very weird box that there is no machine yet that can observe, or not the box, I mean, sorry. It's a very weird little being in the box that just no machine can observe yet, and one day we will observe it, or maybe we will never observe because it's not there. So we don't know. So for me, let's say the perspective after fetter one is more a position of doubt, of not knowing. For you, it's more a dissolution of a belief.
Yes, I would say it's the letting go of a belief or dissolution of a belief. Yeah, yeah, and I think that's usually sufficient to open up the rest of the Pandora's box, if you like, of all the other self-referent illusions. Because once if you have a very fixed, firm belief, this is me,
Hmm.
and there's all these other distinct little me's walking around, so a self in a world of selves. Um, then I think you can begin to open up to more of how you're holding on to particular views. They're all beliefs in a way, but they're not usually as conscious as the belief in the first fetter is quite a consciously held belief that's backed up by society, isn't it? That's saying,
So this, yeah, I see. So the first belief is stronger than the other ones,
I think,
or
yeah,
it's
it's
more conscious.
usually
It's more conscious. It's more
more
at the
conscious, more
conscious level.
conscious.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, you're encouraged to believe this. I mean, from about the age of 2, you're forming an ego identity, aren't you? And to some degree, you need that sort of uh, all those abilities to differentiate. This is me. This is you. Otherwise, it's just an undifferentiated awareness of a baby.
Mm,
So, as
yes.
children develop psychologically as well, there is a sort of there's a need to partake in this illusion, you could say,
Yeah, like
developmentally.
an individualization. So the baby, when he's just born, he doesn't have any concept of maybe the world. Is just feel maybe the breast of his mother, the fact of being hold, the milk that he can drink. He maybe doesn't even has a clear separation between him and his mother. It's not, maybe, I don't know. I mean, maybe some child psychologists, they know this. I don't know, but it's possible that in the early days, the concept of the individual does not exist in the mind of the child, but at some point it will be developed when he will realize, or she will realize, that let's say maybe going in front of a mirror, or like, I mean, eventually you, by interacting, I think, in the world, you realize that in some way you are an individual.
That's right. I mean, I think you have children around that age, don't you? Of
Yes,
beginning to recognize, obviously they recognize their names and they recognize they're different to their sibling, and who the different people are, and so yeah, that whole process of differentiation, and along with that, there is the development of the ego identity, and who you feel you are and who you think you are. I mean, it's pretty loose at that age, but it's
it's
developing.
the starting point. Yes.
Yeah. So
So
yeah,
one thing, let's, so we took some notes about kind of a, let's say, different approach from of fetter one. I will read it, and then we can discuss. So this is something we've wrote together, and it's more like, let's say, maybe a blend of my approach and your approach, or maybe it's only my approach, I don't know. I'm going to read it, and then we discuss. So this approach was written for the audience as, let's say, in opposition, or in contrast with your approach, which is the experiential approach, where basically you say, I try to find this little thinker, this entity, this whatever, this separate agent. I cannot find it, so I conclude it's not there. But then I answer, but how do you know that it's not there just because you cannot find it? Maybe you were not able to find it and it's there. So I use a slightly different approach. I'm going to read it now, and then we discuss. So the first fetter is the illusion of a separate self. So this is your definition. So the first fetter is the illusion of a separate self, an experiencer, a thinker, an agent of actions and decisions. Is there a seer separate from the sin, an author of thoughts, a controller deciding your action and choices? And so this is kind of my answer. So I say this, I say, ultimately, everything is just a bunch of quarks. Quarks, let's just assume it's the smallest particle that can exist. And even if we want to believe in a so-called spiritual world, let's just assume that it's still made of something. Now, maybe it's made of its own quarks, but let's just, I use the word quarks, but I mean the smallest, let's say, the building block of everything, whatever that is. But even if there are many spiritual worlds, which we don't know, maybe there are, maybe not, we don't know, they probably are still made of something. So they're made of this some building block that we have not yet discovered. So I say, ultimately, everything is just a bunch of quarks, but replace quark with the smallest thing you can think of. So what is separation? I say, effectively, it's just a way to group those quarks, so make groups, and then label those groups. Illusion is believing that those groupings have some kind of inherent existence instead of being arbitrarily and usually, sorry, instead of being arbitrarily, usually, maybe it's a mistake here, but whatever, it doesn't matter. So something that doesn't exist, instead of being, let's say, defined arbitrarily and usually based on usefulness. At the end of the day, every quark influences every other quark. So even if they're at the other side of the universe, even indirectly, they will still influence each other, which means that every group, whatever we want those groups to be, will influence every other group. So the question is, what does separation effectively means? Now, let me just give the example. I think I gave you that example. It's kind of a funny example. Um, so I make the example. So the first thing is to say, so most likely everything is made of some building block. Even if we include spiritual realities, whatever, everything is made of some building block. So the thing is, this agent, let's say there is this agent, that this author of thoughts, whatever, it's also made of those building blocks, because everything is made of those building blocks. So your, whether it's your body, your mind, your soul, whatever, everything, it's going to be made of those building blocks, which is the smallest thing that can possibly exist, even at the spiritual level or whatever. So we have this building block, and so like Lego bricks, let's say. And so the thing is, everything is made of those Lego bricks because that's the smallest building block. So everything has to be, by definition, made of those building blocks. And so effectively, things, what we call things, are just groups of those building blocks. are different ways of assembling them. So the idea is, if there is an author of those thoughts or a separate agent, whatever, it is made of those building blocks. And the world is made of those building blocks, and your body is made of those building blocks, and the universe is made of those building blocks, and everything is made of those building blocks. So effectively, and everything influences every other thing, because even two quarks, two building blocks at the opposite side of the universe, if they are part of the same universe, in some way or another, even indirectly, they will influence each other. So then, what I question is more, what does it mean to be separate? So I don't really question if this agent exists or not. But what I say is, if this agent exists, ultimately it's made of the same stuff as everything else. So it's made of the same stuff as your body or whatever. So then that means that that agent effectively cannot be separate. So if it's not separate, maybe the whole question is kind of irrelevant. You see, it's like, because I think the key word before was separation. So it's separate agent. But you see, but so you say with certainty the agent is not there. Whereas I say maybe it is there. We don't know. But I say, but for sure it's not separate. Now, being non-separate, maybe it almost become irrelevant if the agent is there or not, since it's not separate. What do you think?
Well, you say yourself, that the illusion is believing that those groupings have some kind of inherent existence instead of being arbitrary and based on usefulness, right? Um, and I think that's a very key insight, really, because if you believe in the inherent reality of things, I mean, it's not that it's not that you can't. I mean, I'm no scientist or whatever, but it's just what I changed in perspective was realizing how much the mind was making up these kind of arbitrary uh, meanings and labels for things and attributing um, weight and substance to them, when actually it was really just a mental attribution. I was just adding meaning with my mind, if you like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I
So,
understand.
uh, so for me, it's not that there isn't anything actually out there. It's not that is. You could say that's, we all can agree that's a glass. But what is different in the perspective is not feeling like there is some inherent thing that I am perceiving, and therefore it's like it all comes back to trying to substantiate the self, really. That the way that we try to substantiate the world and make it real, make it separate into separate, discrete things. It suits our illusion of self, if you like. It reinforces a feeling that there is someone in here who's in control, and can maybe modify the world. Modify our experience of the world as well. I don't know if that's kind of going at too much
No,
of a tangent to what you
I
were
think I
saying.
understand. Yes, I don't have exactly the same perspective, but I want to give this example, which I gave to you before, the example of the cats. Like, so the idea is to show this idea of the grouping and the quarks, etc. So let's imagine that there are three cats. So let's say three cats laying down one next to each other. Now, usually we will say those are three separate cats, as if this was something completely objective. So we will say cat number one, cat number two, cat number three. So we group them as the cat. But this, in my example, what I want to stress is that this grouping is arbitrary, because effectively I could, for example, group them in cat heads. So basically, the three heads is group one. So it's a grouping, because at the end it's all made of quarks, let's say, or whatever, some spiritual quark, doesn't matter, but it's all made of some tiny building block. which is the building block of sorry, it's the smallest building block of everything. So effectively, it's just groupings of those building blocks. Now I can use the logical grouping of cat, saying, you see, this is an entire cat, cat number one, an entire cat, cat number two, an entire cat, cat number three. But if I wanted to, I could group them as, for example, saying the three heads are the group of the heads. The three bodies are is the group of the bodies, and the three tails is the group of the tails. And of this grouping is not less true than the other group, because we are just grouping building blocks, quarks, and we can
Mm-hmm.
group them
Group them
in
how we
whatever
like.
way we want. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Now the only difference, however, is that some groups can be more useful than others. So grouping them as cat number one, cat number two, and cat number three is probably more useful than grouping them as cat heads, cat bodies, and cat tails. You see? But effectively, it's just arbitrary. So the idea is any grouping is just an arbitrary way of labeling, let's say, groups of quarks. Now, of course, some make more sense than others, but only from a perspective of usefulness and not from a perspective of truth. So I would argue that even if there was this, let's say, which maybe there is not, in my opinion, even if there was this agent, this thinker, this author of thoughts, whatever, it will have to be made of those same building blocks. And so effectively, you see, so effectively debating its existence is more like debating if we want to name a group after it or not. So the whole idea of does it exist or not does not really make sense, because it's like, let's say there are cats, there is a cat, and we say, does the tail exist? Well, if you make a separate grouping for the tail, then yes. But if you just say, no, no, this is not the tail, it's just part of the body, then it doesn't. So you see, so I think this is kind of the idea. It's like the idea that ultimately everything is made of certain building blocks, and we group arbitrarily. I mean, maybe not completely arbitrarily, but based on usefulness, but not based on truth, based on usefulness. We group those quarks, and we form groups, and we call those groups separate things. But in reality, there is nothing separate about them, because each one of those quarks influence all the other quarks,
Right.
because they exist
So
in the same universe.
yeah, so ultimately it's a kind of interconnectedness due to non-separation, a fundamental
Yeah.
state of
So
non-separation is what you're saying.
so it's more that the idea of separation is arbitrary. So the way
Yes.
I, let's say, overcome the first fetter is not by
Mm-hmm.
saying the agent does not exist, but it's
Mm-hmm.
by saying even if it existed, it will not be separate, because the idea
Okay.
of separation makes no sense, because it's just an arbitrary grouping of some building blocks.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's easier to accept that idea when you have a physical reality, say, of a cat with fur and flesh and blood and so on. But I think one of the points of, looking for the self as agent, as kind of thinker in the box kind of thing, is that, you could say it's just made up by mind. It's just made up by imagination. It's like, think of a watermelon. You can think of that's a classic one, isn't it? Think of a lovely, juicy red watermelon, and you can imagine holding it in your hands and so on, but you can't do anything else with it. Or imagine a teapot, but you can't pour the tea out. Where is this imagined self? If I say, could you point to yourself right now? Where is it? Where is it?
Yes, but I
Um,
could argue that it's not that only things that you can touch and feel exist. Like, what about gravity? Well, you can say you
right.
can sense it or experience it, but I could say, what about the fact that 1 plus 1 equal 2? It's
Hmm.
still something that kind of exists. It's weird. It's like
Right.
you cannot
Yeah.
touch the fact that 1 plus 1 equal 2, but
True. It's
one
more
plus one is
abstract.
always going to be 2. Yeah. So
Yes.
abstracting exists in some way. Or the
Yes.
number
Yeah.
pi, like 3.14, whatever. The number pi, I think I'm
Mm.
pronouncing it correctly. Like the
5.
diameter of the ratio between the diameter and the circumference of the circle, 3.14, whatever. I mean,
Ah.
it exists. It's non tangible, but it exists.
Well, yes. I guess where does abstract shade into non-existence or existence,
Yeah,
or
of course, of
it,
course. The words are blurry because it's not. It's we will have to define what existence means exactly and what abstract means exactly, and maybe there is a continuum. So maybe I mean, maybe there are things that don't exist in a tangible way, but they exist in an abstract way, so they are still considered existing. I mean, who knows? But I think what I'm trying to say is that I think this is my best guess so far. Of course, I could change tomorrow, my idea tomorrow. But so far, I will say I believe that there is a good chance that everything is made of some ultimate building block. And so, if that's the case, then everything is just grouping of this building block. And so every separation is just a group, a label for a group, and it's completely arbitrary. And so effectively, the idea of separation doesn't really make sense because true separation will mean complete absence of influence, which I think is impossible because if something was, because you see, the thing is, if something could not influence, let's say, everything else in any way, it will be as if it did not exist. So let's say that for me, there is absolutely no way to influence you directly or indirectly. For you, it's as if I don't exist. It doesn't matter if I
right,
exist or not. You understand? For you, I don't exist.
yes,
So if I cannot influence you in any way,
yeah,
effectively, as far as you're concerned, I don't exist.
right, okay. No, I get it. I mean, whatever way works for you, I guess. It's like I think you've arrived at the same sort of destination from a very different angle, but it's interesting, isn't it? And ultimately, your angle shades more into deeper fetters. So that would be interesting. That whole construction of reality and how we, um, yeah, how we make separation, make the illusion of separation. I think that would be an interest. That discussion can go all the way through the fetters as well. Um, so, but yeah, do you feel like as you go through your day, you feel like there is, when you think of when the word Giotto comes up, I mean, or when someone calls you by your name, or you just think,
Well,
I
usually
am
I
doing
answer.
XYZ. Yeah, well, yeah, hopefully you would. We do need the conventional reality and I know you don't like that word either.
No, no, this is not true. I mean, it's like, I mean, because it will be too long to go into this what conventional means exactly, and so conventional
Yeah,
versus non-conventional. But I will say, let's say, my day-to-day reality. Basically, I don't assume that there is. So, but the keyword is assume. So I'm not saying I know
yeah,
that there is not. I say I don't assume that there is
okay,
a separate entity. But
yeah,
maybe there is, maybe there is not. I just don't know. But I don't assume that there is. So it's
right,
like it's
okay,
more like I'm open to whatever you say. Like say you open the fridge, you could open the fridge assuming that there is chocolate cake, or
mm-hmm,
you can open the fridge saying being sure that there is no chocolate cake, which is more your
mm-hmm,
case. So let's
right,
say most people will open the fridge with this with the assumption that there is going to be chocolate cake. Let's say the agent.
mhm,
You
yeah,
are going to open the fridge with the assumption there is no chocolate cake, and I'm
mm-hmm,
going to open the fridge with no assumption. I'm like, let's
mm-hmm,
see what's in the fridge.
mm-hmm.
So
Well,
that would be my a
yeah.
metaphor for the way I see the world.
Well, I think ultimately, ultimately you do arrive at a place of not knowing anything, a positive not knowing that you're
Yes.
talking about, and but I think for most people that comes with the end of fetter 10, not the end of fetter 1.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
of course, but we are
uh,
just starting here, so we give a glimpse of the other feathers, but this is about
yeah,
feather one. So the agent. So feather one, we can say it's about the agent, the belief in an agent, which
okay,
should have free will, basically. Is that correct? Is it a good
yes,
definition?
yes, a good
Okay.
definition. Yeah.
Anything you want to add for this video about feather one?
Not really. I think we've kind of covered the most important aspects. Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
so I'm going to
mm,
pause the recording, and the next video is
okay.
going to be feather number two.
Excellent.